Humans are getting stronger. How do I know this? Well, it seems since the creation of folding locking knives, humans have got either clumsy or stronger. Not. Well, maybe it is, because after all these years of locking folders being around, obviously strong enough for soldiers, adventurers, regular people to deploy and use in their everyday lives, somehow or other, their locking mechanisms are no longer adequate. Makes sense, right? No, it doesn't. This is complete marketing BS. Don't be a sucker. Right, when one is cutting with a knife, should we have to be reminded? We're pressing down on it because we need to apply pressure to the blade, and we're doing this motion like this. Okay, so when we're pressing down on the blade wants to move up like this. In this case, the blade cannot move up no matter what because it's pressing under a compressive force. In this particular case, this huge chunk of steel here. Okay, and if it's not a huge chunk of steel, it might be a liner lock or a frame lock knife, and there'll be a steel pin through the frame there. So anyway, the blade cannot come up like that. At no time to undergo the forces which people are advocating are ridiculous, they're unrealistic forces, and that is that the blade would be fixed immobile in some object, and you would be pushing down on the handle, so you would want to close the handle like this. So there would not be a compressive force on here. Well, I'd like someone to tell me what scenario that would be where the blade cannot move, right? So in any soft object, whether that's flesh or some vegetable matter, one would be able to do this. If this was set in concrete, of course, one wouldn't be able to do it. If I shoved it into a crack in a rock and wanted to stand on the handle for some crazy reason, then yes, you could apply anything from, 60 kilos, if you weigh 60 kilos or more, let's say you weigh 70, 80 kilograms, up to, 100 plus kilograms. Probably you need to go and see the doctor if you're not over 6 foot. So anyway, you're not, people are talking about forces like, 250 kilograms. That's a quarter of a ton. These are unrealistic forces. And besides that, you can't exert that with your hand. It's not possible to exert those forces with your hand. So as this knife is, this particular one as it is, if this was fixed immobile, there's no way I could exert that force with my hand. I'd have to stick a steel pipe on this and lever this down. Now, what reason would that be for? What could be the possible reason to lever the knife when this is fixed like that? Because you're not going to do anything like that. No, unrealistic, totally science fiction, not even science fiction. What people could do is like what they would do with their fixed blade knives, and that is to turn the knife sideways and maybe lever something. In that case, it's not a question of the knife blade moving in this direction. It's a question of the frame being able to be rigid enough to hold the blade and not deform. Of course, this would also be abuse of the knife. In reality, where does a folding knife have to be strong to be safe? Let's take a look at it. A folding knife has to be strong in this part here at the back, so when the blade is being forced down onto something and cutting, applying pressure, and you would apply a lot of pressure maybe if the blade was not so sharp, or maybe you were trying to cut through something very thick, the more pressure you apply, the quicker in general you would be able to go through that material. Well, in order to stop the blade coming forward, in other words, the frame would be destroyed in some way, you have to have either a strong stop pin up here, a steel pin. You can see the pin, partially see the pin here in this knife. This one has a piece of steel down the back because it's a traditional lock back, so it will be undergoing a compressive force. And this one has another a piece of steel here too in the spine, so it's also undergoing a compressive force, very, very thick. None of these folders are going to fail in normal use. You can apply a lot of pressure here. You would have to deform this pin and hence maybe damage the frame. You would have to damage the main pivot here in this knife, and unless the frame warped, because you'd be applying a bending motion to that pivot point. And this one here, you'd have to, compress this huge chunk of steel in such a way that everything just fell apart. It's not going to happen in reality. So, in answer to my original question, humans have not become stronger. locking knives have not become suddenly useless or always been useless. No, marketing has become better, and we're convinced, or we're being convinced, that the best aspect of a knife is the strongest lock. Well, that's just not true. The best aspect of a knife is durability, sharpness, and durability, a combination of those things, because you want to be able to just buy one folding knife, not have to buy folding knife after folding knife, and you want something to be quite durable. Now, that level of durability will depend upon what the end use of the knife is. So the durability that a soldier might put their knife through is possibly more than someone that uses a knife on the weekend picnic, something like that. So let's not reinvent the wheel, shall we? Because I can drive a special vehicle called a bulldozer into a supermarket car park, and I can tell you that not one car short of a tank in that car park is going to damage my bulldozer car. But the bulldozer car is completely inappropriate and overkill for that particular job of shopping in the supermarket. And yet, it's really super strong. No one can argue that the bulldozer is not much stronger than a car, may not move as fast as one, but it is much, much stronger than the car. Doesn't mean to say that it makes it the appropriate vehicle to be used. So once again, I welcome anyone here that's watching this that disagrees with this to please publicly put a comment about where that scenario would be true, and that is having the blade fixed and applying a huge downward force on the handle so the blade was immovable. Where that scenario would occur in real life, I'd really like to know. So there you go. Now I can tell you right now, out of these free folding knives, this is like a type roller lock. This is a traditional lockback knife, and this is a type of modified roller lock too. This is really modern. This design here has been around for, a long time, probably 100 years or something like that, close to it. This is a relatively modern design here. The most reliable knife out of all these is going to be this one here. Why do I say that? Because this has the fewest number of parts for mud, sand, and grit to interfere with. This has the fewest number of parts. It is easier to maintain. There's no washers, extra washers like in these two knives. This one has bearings in here. This one has some kind of bushes in here. This one has springs in here. This one has springs too. This only has one simple spring, and it's not a coil spring. It's a piece of spring steel, spring wire. This has a coil spring in it, and this one has something like a coil spring in it here too. So this one is definitely the easiest one to maintain here and the simplest form. Now, as to which is the strongest, well, the word strong is subjective. It depends on what we're talking about. Being strong for what? Let's look at that. All folding knives, including this one here, are more than strong enough for the regular task. That's pushing down and cutting something like this. As opposed to sticking the knife sideways and levering, well then the strength is going to be dependent upon somewhat the what kind of plastic deformation the blade can undergo before failing. Okay, that's one. Two is if the blade doesn't fail here, what about does it fail in the frame? The frame may become deformed and the blade falls apart there. So something like levering with these knives is not really a smart thing to do. So then I'd have to look at something like this. Is this a bit thicker? No, not really. It's got some steel liners in there. This has got really big, this is quite thick with steel liners, so this would be the strongest option in that case if I was to lever with the blade. And this happens to have the thickest blade out of all these three here. But levering with a blade is a really dumb idea. It's better to use a thing called a pry bar, the tool for the job. Now, is there even a lock on this thing here? Well, these knives have been around since the year dot, and they've been used all over the world. I've personally taken a Swiss Army knife trekking in Nepal, and it never failed me once. There was not a lock on the blade, nor did I ever go to cut myself at any one time. And I even hacked into sugarcane that I found fallen off the back of some porter there, for a bit of a snack one day with this knife, not this particular one, but with a Swiss Army knife similar to this, and it never failed me. And there doesn't have to be a lock on the back because, again, the pressure is downwards. I'm not sticking this thing in. And sure, if this gets stuck in, this might happen. Right, so if I was to stick this into something and it doesn't move and I push down on it, of course the handle is going to push down, there's no lock, but you would not be doing that, right? Why would I be sticking this into something and it doesn't move and I push down on it? Well, that's totally unrealistic. I'm going to be pushing down like this and cutting, or I'm going to be having the knife like this and cutting like this, and again pushing it back here. It's not going to fail because it's up against this piece of steel, which is then under compression in there. So of course a locking folder, such as this, if it was locking, this would be safe, because if I want to grip the blade like this, then in case that would close over there like that, well, that could be in for a nasty surprise. If I've got my hands out of the way, if there's any chance of it, I'm holding the knife like this, and even if it was to close, well, it's not going to cut me, is it? No.